November 21, 1985. Washington, D.C., 09:45 hours. A blue sedan accelerates down Massachusetts Avenue, weaving through morning traffic. Behind the wheel, a 31-year-old Navy intelligence analyst named Jonathan Pollard grips the steering wheel with white knuckles. His palms are slick with sweat. His heart pounds against his ribcage like a trapped animal. His wife, Anne, sits beside him, clutching a leather purse against her chest. Inside that purse, her passport, their last hope. In the rearview mirror, Pollard watches two unmarked sedans keeping pace. FBI surveillance. They've been following him for 3 days now. Ever since the first interview, ever since he used the code word, cactus. That single word, slipped into a phone call with his wife, had set everything in motion. It meant, we're burned, destroy the evidence, run. But Pollard hadn't run, not immediately. For 3 days, he had wandered around Washington, waiting, expecting, believing that any moment, an Israeli agent would appear, deliver new passports, whisk them to safety. No one came. Now, with FBI cars closing in, he's making his final play. Ahead, the gates of the Israeli embassy come into view. The compound sits on International Drive, technically sovereign Israeli territory. If he can just get inside those gates, American law enforcement cannot touch him. That's the plan. That's what his handlers promised. If things go bad, they told him during a meeting in Tel Aviv the previous summer, come to the embassy. We'll take care of you. Pollard's foot presses harder on the accelerator. A diplomatic limousine approaches the embassy gates from the opposite direction, probably some attaché arriving for morning business. Pollard sees his opening. He guns the engine, tailgates the limousine through the security checkpoint. The guards barely have time to react before Pollard's sedan is through. Past the gates, onto Israeli soil. He throws the car into park, steps out, walks toward the embassy entrance with his wife close behind. I need to speak to someone, he tells the first security guard he sees. His voice is shaking. Tell them Danny Cohen is here. They'll know who I am. Danny Cohen, his operational code name. The identity Israel's intelligence service, a small secretive unit called LACAM, gave him 18 months ago when he volunteered to become their most productive American spy. The guard makes a phone call, speaks in rapid Hebrew. Minutes pass. Pollard shifts his weight from foot to foot and reaches for his hand. Then the answer comes. No, the embassy refuses to grant asylum. Not, wait here while we figure this out. Not, let us make some calls. Just, no. Security officers escort Pollard and his wife back through the compound, back toward the gates, back onto American soil. The moment his feet touch the pavement outside the embassy walls, FBI agents move in. Badges flash, handcuffs click. Jonathan J. Pollard, you're under arrest for espionage. In 18 months of spying, this man had stolen more classified documents than perhaps any spy in American history. The 10-volume NSA manual revealing how America collects signals intelligence worldwide, frequency by frequency, country by country, priority by priority. The names of thousands of people who cooperated with U.S. intelligence agencies across the globe, satellite photographs of military installations, communications intercepts, military assessments, technical capabilities. The Secretary of Defense would later say the stolen material could fill a room 10 feet by 6 feet by 6 feet. The damage assessment would conclude that Pollard had compromised a volume of classified information as great as any reported espionage case, and the FBI caught him because one coworker, just one, noticed something strange on a Friday afternoon, trusted his instincts, and picked up the phone. Before this operation goes dark, subscribe and help uncover the truth they tried to erase. But how did we get here? How did a troubled Navy analyst with a history of lies and delusions gain access to America's most guarded secrets? How did a man the CIA had already flagged as mentally unstable end up with top-secret clearance? And how did he nearly escape? The story begins decades earlier, South Bend, Indiana, 1967. Jonathan J. Pollard was born in Galveston, Texas, on August 7, 1954. His father, Morris Pollard, was an award-winning microbiologist who would eventually teach at the University of Notre Dame. His mother's family, the Kleins from Vilna, Lithuania, had been nearly wiped out in the Holocaust. These two facts, the academic father, the Holocaust legacy, would shape young Jonathan in ways no one could have predicted. The Pollard family moved to South Bend, Indiana, in 1961. Morris Pollard was a brilliant scientist, a man who rubbed shoulders with Nobel laureates. At least a dozen Nobel Prize winners attended young Jonathan's 4th birthday party during a scientific conference in Sweden. But South Bend in the 1960s was not an easy place to grow up Jewish. Anti-Semitism was openly expressed. Jews were excluded from the prestigious social clubs. Jonathan felt like an outsider from the start. His classmates would later recall him as a bullied nerd. While other teenagers in the late 60s and early 70s wore their hair long and their jeans sloppy, Jonathan kept his hair cropped short. His shirt was always tucked in. He wore belts. He rarely laughed. Shortly before his bar mitzvah in 1967, something happened happened that would mark him forever. He asked his parents for an unusual gift, a trip to the Nazi death camps in Europe. The Pollard family made the journey, confronting the horror that had consumed his mother's relatives. Around the same time, the Six-Day War erupted in the Middle East. Israel, surrounded by enemies facing annihilation, launched a preemptive strike and won a stunning victory. For the 13-year-old Jonathan, these two events converged into a single obsession: the survival of the Jewish state. The Pollard family made a special effort to instill Jewish identity in their children. This included, crucially, a devotion to Zionism, the belief that Jews needed their own homeland as protection against another Holocaust. Jonathan absorbed this teaching with an intensity that concerned even his parents. He grew up with what he later called a racial obligation to Israel. In 1970, at age 16, Jonathan visited Israel for the first time as part of a science program at the Weizmann Institute of Science. The trip did not go smoothly. He was hospitalized after getting into a violent fight with another student. One scientist at the institute remembered Pollard leaving behind a reputation of being a troublemaker. But something else emerged during his teenage years, something that would define his entire life. Jonathan Pollard became a storyteller, a fabulist, a man who lived in fantasy as much as reality. By high school, he had developed a habit of telling classmates and their parents that he was going to be a spy for Israel. Not someday, in the abstract way teenagers talk about future careers. He spoke with certainty, with conviction, as if it were already happening. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. After high school, Pollard enrolled at Stanford University. There, his fantasy life exploded beyond all control. He told acquaintances he was a dual citizen of the United States and Israel. A complete fabrication. He claimed to have worked for Mossad, Israel's legendary intelligence service. He boasted about attaining the rank of colonel in the Israel Defense Forces. He went so far as to send himself a telegram addressed to Colonel Pollard. He told people he had killed an Arab while on guard duty at a kibbutz. None of it was true, not a single word. He also claimed his father was a CIA operative, that the family had fled Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring in 1968, when Morris Pollard's CIA role was discovered by Soviet forces. Also completely false. The family had never lived in Czechoslovakia. Morris Pollard was a microbiologist, not a spy. His Stanford yearbook photo listed him as Colonel Pollard. He reportedly convinced almost everyone on campus that Israeli intelligence was secretly paying his tuition. He spent hours playing war and strategy games with a small group of friends, acting out elaborate fantasies of espionage and military heroism. One classmate later told investigators that Pollard was a teller of tall tales, but that he was so well informed and articulate that he made what might otherwise have been an outlandish series of claims quite convincing. After earning his degree in political science, Pollard enrolled in graduate school at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He never finished. In 1977, he applied for a job with the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA conducted its standard background investigation. They administered a polygraph test. What they discovered should have ended Pollard's intelligence career before it began. The polygraph revealed prolific illegal drug use between 1974 and 1978. Investigators also noted his pathological penchant for telling stories, including stories that gave the impression he was already working for Israeli intelligence. The CIA's assessment was damning: emotionally unstable, grandiose, unreliable, a security risk, unfit for access to classified information. Jonathan Pollard was rejected. But here's where the system failed, catastrophically. 2 years later, in September 1979, Pollard applied for a different job, analyst, at the Navy Field Operational Intelligence Office. The Navy conducted its own background check. As part of that process, they requested information from the CIA. The CIA never provided its damning assessment. Jonathan Pollard was hired by U.S. Naval Intelligence, given a security clearance, granted access to some of America's most sensitive secrets. The fox had entered the hen house, and nobody noticed. From day one, Jonathan Pollard should have been fired. Working at the Navy Field Operational Intelligence Office, he continued his lifelong pattern of grandiose lies and attention-seeking behavior. His colleagues found him arrogant, obnoxious, a know-it-all who couldn't stop bragging about his supposed connections and accomplishments. He once claimed to colleagues in a classified workplace that he had worked for Israeli intelligence. Nobody reported it. They thought he was joking. His tall tales were more or less a joke around the office. In 1980, during an assignment with Task Force 168, the naval intelligence element responsible for human intelligence operations, Pollard's supervisor caught him in an outright lie. Pollard had made false statements about dealings with another government agency. The lie served no apparent purpose except to make himself seem more important than he was. His security clearance was reduced to secret. He was told to seek psychiatric help, but Pollard fought back. He filed a grievance, threatened lawsuits. The Navy, unwilling to deal with the administrative hassle, backed down. In 1982, after a psychiatrist concluded he had no mental illness requiring treatment. Pollard's full SCI clearance was restored. SCI, sensitive compartmented information, was the highest level of classification. It meant access to the crown jewels of American intelligence. An Air Force clinical psychologist later reviewed Pollard's file and was alarmed by what he found. He noted that Pollard was grandiose, manipulative, and at times uncertain of what was real, exaggerated, imagined, or false. The psychologist recommended therapy and assignment to non-sensitive duties. The recommendation was ignored. Pollard wasn't just mentally unstable and prone to pathological lying. He was also financially reckless. He consistently lived beyond his means. He had chronic difficulty paying his debts. He lied on job applications about holding a master's degree from Tufts, a degree he never completed. Red flag after red flag after red flag. And yet by October 1984, Jonathan Pollard had been promoted multiple times, from GS-7 to GS-13, a significant career advancement. He was working as an analyst at the Navy's Anti-Terrorist Alert Center in Suitland, Maryland. More importantly, he had access to classified libraries and computer systems across the entire U.S. intelligence community. His job required him to request and review documents from multiple agencies. He could pull files from the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the State Department, the National Reconnaissance Office, any agency that produced intelligence relevant to counterterrorism, all because the system failed to connect the dots. The CIA knew Pollard was unstable and unfit for classified work. The Navy never learned. The FBI, which should have been investigating such obvious security risks, was never informed. And by the time Jonathan Pollard gained access to America's most sensitive intelligence, he had already found his handlers. May 29, 1984. The coffee shop of the Washington Hilton Hotel, a corner table. Jonathan Pollard sits across from a man named Colonel Aviam Seller, a legendary Israeli Air Force pilot and genuine war hero. 3 years earlier, Seller had flown one of the F-15s providing cover during Operation Opera, Israel's audacious strike that destroyed Saddam Hussein's Osirak nuclear reactor. Before that, he had shot down a Soviet-piloted MiG-21 during combat over the Suez Canal in 1970. Seller was everything Pollard fantasized about being: a warrior, an operative, a man of action defending the Jewish state. The colonel was in Washington pursuing a master's degree in computer science at New York University. Occasionally, to supplement his income and promote Israel, he gave presentations at the New York Stock Exchange to drum up interest in Israel bonds. After one such presentation, a stockbroker approached him. The man was awed by Seller's story, the combat missions, the nuclear reactor strike. He mentioned that a friend of his, someone who worked as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Navy, wanted to meet him. Seller was immediately suspicious. Was this a setup, an FBI sting operation? American counterintelligence regularly tried to catch foreign intelligence services recruiting spies, a technique known as a dangle. He sent word back to Tel Aviv through official channels. Israel's Mossad, the legendary external intelligence service, wanted nothing to do with this approach. They had a standing prohibition against recruiting American Jews to spy inside the United States. The risk was simply too great. If an operation like that was exposed, the damage to U.S.-Israeli relations could be catastrophic. The blowback against American Jews could be severe. "We have no interest in meeting him," the Mossad responded. But Lachem didn't follow the same rules. Lachem, the Bureau of Scientific Relations, was a small secretive intelligence unit under the Israeli Defense Ministry. Unlike the professional Mossad, Lachem was something of an amateur operation, staffed by scientists and military officers rather than trained espionage professionals. Lachem's director was a legend in Israeli intelligence, Rafi Eitan, a founding figure of the Israeli security establishment. Eitan had been part of the team that captured Adolf Eichmann in Argentina in 1960. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devoted to Israeli security. He had close ties to Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. When the opportunity to recruit an American intelligence analyst landed on Eitan's desk, he saw gold. "Move forward," he instructed Seller. "But be careful." So here they sat in the Washington Hilton, the war hero and the fantasist, the pilot who had destroyed a nuclear reactor and the analyst who sent himself telegrams addressed to Colonel. Pollard wasted no time. He told Seller he worked for U.S. naval intelligence. He claimed, with apparent sincerity, that the United States was withholding critical intelligence from Israel, information about Arab military capabilities, Soviet weapons shipments, chemical and biological weapons programs, intelligence that could mean life or death for the Jewish state. "I want to help," Pollard said. "I can fix this." Within days, he was already delivering classified documents. His first package included 48 classified items, just a taste of what he could access. For this initial delivery, Pollard received $10,000 in cash. He also received a very expensive diamond and sapphire ring, which he promptly used to propose to his girlfriend, Ann Henderson. That summer, Uncle Joe, a cover identity used by Lachem, sponsored an all-expenses-paid trip to Paris for Jonathan and Ann, as an engagement present. When Anne spotted a $7,000 sapphire ring in a Paris jewelry store, Uncle Joe purchased that for her too. During the Paris trip, Pollard met Rafi Eitan in person for the first time. The spy master was impressed. A man with intellectual powers of the highest order, Eitan later recalled. His detailed memory, his understanding of Middle East geopolitics, his attachment and desire to help Israel, it was extraordinary. There's no doubt he placed himself in huge risk, and he fully realized that. His motivation to help us, the state of Israel, was above and beyond. But Eitan was also ruthless. He believed it was necessary to morally compromise Pollard, to pay him, to create leverage, to make retreat impossible. An idealistic volunteer could get cold feet and walk away. A paid agent, complicit in receiving cash and gifts, was trapped. Eitan insisted Pollard accept a monthly salary, initially $1,500, eventually $2,500 per month, plus tens of thousands more in cash disbursements, luxury hotels, opulent meals, and trips to Europe and Israel. Jonathan Pollard had finally become what he always fantasized about being, an Israeli spy, and he was getting paid for it. Beginning in late January 1985, Jonathan Pollard established an operational routine that was as brazen as it was effective. Every other Friday, like clockwork, he would remove hundreds of pages of classified material from his workplace, the Navy Operational Surveillance and Intelligence Center in Suitland, Maryland. The documents went into his briefcase. He walked out the door, past security, and drove to a local car wash. At the car wash, he transferred the classified documents from his briefcase into a suitcase. Then he drove to an apartment on Van Ness Street, a few blocks from the Israeli embassy in northwest Washington. The apartment belonged to Irit Erb, a secretary at the Israeli embassy who was actually a Lakam operative. Inside the apartment was a specially installed high-speed copying machine provided by Israeli intelligence specifically for this operation. Erb would duplicate every document while Pollard waited. The copying could take hours. Then, Monday morning, Pollard would return, retrieve the suitcase with the originals, and smuggle them back into his workplace before anyone noticed they were missing. His first major delivery, January 23, 1985, consisted of 5 suitcases full of classified material. 5 suitcases in a single delivery. On the last Saturday of each month, Pollard met with his handlers at Erb's apartment to discuss additional assignments. His primary case officer, Yossi Yagur, a Lakam officer operating under diplomatic cover at the embassy, would give him lists of documents to steal. Yagur told Pollard on multiple occasions that selected items of his intelligence were known and appreciated by the highest levels of the Israeli government. This thrilled Pollard. He was finally the hero he had always imagined himself to be. The volume of stolen material was staggering, beyond anything the Israelis had anticipated. Over 18 months, Pollard photocopied and delivered more than 800 classified documents. He also handed over approximately 1,500 classified intelligence messages from daily summaries he wasn't even asked to steal. He just threw them in because he thought they might be useful. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger would later say the stolen material could fill a room 6 feet by 6 feet by 10 feet. What exactly did Pollard give Israel? The crown jewel was the RASIN manual, the radio signal notations guide used by the National Security Agency. It was classified Top Secret Umbra, one of the highest classification levels in existence. The manual ran to 10 volumes. It's the Bible, one former communications intelligence officer later explained. It tells how we collect signals anywhere in the world. The RASIN detailed every known signal being intercepted by American intelligence, frequency by frequency, source by source, geographic region by geographic region. It revealed which communications of which countries the NSA was monitoring and in what order of priority. In other words, it was a complete roadmap to American signals intelligence collection worldwide. Pollard gave Israel every single page of all 10 volumes. He also provided a year's worth of daily intelligence summaries from the Navy's 6th Fleet, detailed memos recording American observations of Soviet planes, ships, and submarines operating in the Mediterranean Sea, documents revealing exactly how U.S. Navy intelligence tracked Soviet submarines, material showing that American reconnaissance satellites could photograph targets from angles previously unknown to foreign powers. He delivered intelligence on Pakistani nuclear weapons programs, Iraqi and Syrian chemical weapons development, Libyan air defense systems, the physical layout of PLO headquarters in Tunisia, which Israel subsequently bombed using the targeting data Pollard provided. And crucially, devastatingly, he compromised the names of thousands of people around the world who had cooperated with U.S. intelligence agencies. Much of this material would prove valuable primarily to nations other than Israel. American intelligence officials later suspected, though never conclusively proved, that some documents made their way to Moscow. The theory was that Israel traded intelligence to the Soviet Union in exchange for allowing Jewish emigration. Whether or not the material reached the Soviets, the damage was catastrophic. The government's damage assessment concluded that Pollard had compromised a breadth and volume of classified information as great as any reported espionage case, and had adversely affected U.S. interests vis-à-vis numerous countries, including potentially the Soviet Union. Prosecutors noted the damage exceeded that caused by Ronald Pelton, an NSA employee who sold surveillance secrets directly to the Soviet Union. And for 18 months, with all those red flags in his file, nobody caught him, until someone did. By the fall of 1985, small cracks were beginning to show in Jonathan Pollard's operation. His supervisor at the Anti-Terrorist Alert Center noticed something peculiar. Pollard was requesting and handling large amounts of classified material concerning the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Israel, but his job focused on threats to North America and the Eastern Caribbean. Why was an analyst assigned to Caribbean counterterrorism suddenly obsessed with Syrian communications and Pakistani nuclear programs? There was another problem. Pollard was falling behind in his actual work. The bi-weekly document runs to Irit Erb's apartment consumed enormous time and energy. He was so busy stealing that he couldn't perform his legitimate duties. The volume had also gone to his head. He demanded a raise from his Israeli handlers, arguing that the quality and quantity of his intelligence justified more money. He was hosting lavish dinner parties at expensive restaurants. His lifestyle had become noticeably extravagant for a mid-level government analyst. Even Rafi Eitan, back in Tel Aviv, sensed the operation couldn't last much longer. In August 1985, he later admitted, there were already thoughts of freezing Pollard. The volume of material was creating an obvious paper trail. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. But Eitan couldn't resist. A specific request came in from an officer in the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate. Urgent intelligence about Iraq was needed. Eitan decided to run Pollard for just a few more months. Those few more months would prove fatal to the operation. The moment that ended, everything came on a Friday afternoon in late October 1985, 4:15 in the afternoon. The quiet before a long weekend. Most people in the building were thinking about going home. A co-worker, whose name has never been publicly revealed, watched Jonathan Pollard carry a large package of top-secret material out of the building. The package was appropriately wrapped. Pollard had a courier pass authorizing him to transport classified documents. Technically, nothing he was doing violated any visible rule, but something felt wrong. It was late Friday afternoon. Nobody transports classified documents to other agencies at 4:15 on a Friday before a long weekend. There was nothing urgent happening, no crisis requiring immediate action, and Pollard wasn't heading toward any known appropriate destination, not toward the CIA, not toward the DIA, not toward any of the neighboring intelligence facilities. He was getting into his wife's car. The co-worker could have shrugged it off, could have assumed it was nothing, could have decided it wasn't his business. Instead, he reported what he saw. See something, say something. The FBI and Naval Investigative Service launched an immediate investigation. They installed pinhole cameras around Pollard's cubicle, monitoring his every move at work. Day after day, they watched him collect classified documents, far more than his job required, and carry them out of the building. On October 25th, Pollard was observed carrying a large bundle from his office to his wife's car. Surveillance intensified. In mid-November, FBI agents brought Pollard in for questioning. They asked about the unauthorized removal of classified information, about his unusual interest in Middle East intelligence, about the documents that didn't match his job description. Pollard lied. He concocted a story about seeking professional opinions from colleagues at other agencies, getting a second look at some analysis, routine stuff. The investigators didn't believe him, but they weren't ready to make an arrest. They wanted to watch longer, to identify his contacts, to understand the full scope of the operation. During the interview, Pollard was allowed to make phone calls, standard procedure. One of those calls was to his wife Anne. During that call, Pollard worked a single word into the conversation, a word that sounded innocuous to anyone listening. Cactus. It was a pre-arranged code word. It meant, we're compromised. Get rid of everything. Prepare to run. Anne Pollard sprang into action. She collected a suitcase full of classified documents from their apartment, material Jonathan had brought home but not yet delivered. She contacted Pollard's Israeli handlers to warn them. For the next several days, Pollard continued to stall the FBI. He submitted to additional interviews. He lied repeatedly. He was buying time for his handlers to escape, time for the Israelis to arrange his extraction. The handlers did escape. Within 24 hours of receiving Anne's warning, every Israeli operative connected to the Pollard operation had fled the United States. Yossi Yager drove to Canada and caught a flight. Irit Erb fled to Mexico. Ilan Ravid, another embassy attaché involved in the operation, flew out through Miami. Colonel Aviam Seller and his wife took a train to New York and caught the first available flight to London. All were out of the country in 24 hours. All escaped prosecution. Jonathan Pollard expected the same courtesy. He didn't get it. The day after the FBI first questioned him, Jonathan Pollard made a phone call to Yossi Yager. Yager allegedly told him there was a team in the country standing by to rescue him. An escape plan was in place. Just wait for contact. Over the next 2 days, Pollard sent his wife Anne out to walk around their neighborhood multiple times. He was certain an Israeli agent would approach her, deliver instructions, provide new identities, new passports, an extraction route. No one came. What Pollard didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that Rafi Eitan had already made the decision. There would be no rescue, no extraction, no new life in Tel Aviv. Eitan had ordered the entire team to flee immediately. The apartment with the high-speed copier was cleared out. Every trace of the operation was being erased. And Jonathan Pollard, the man who had given Israel an intelligence windfall beyond its wildest dreams, was being left behind. In a 2014 interview, Eitan admitted the truth. He had known about Pollard's impending arrest days before it happened. He had immediately contacted Prime Minister Shimon Peres and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin to inform them. I gave him a pre-arranged signal to leave the United States, Eitan said, but he wandered around for 3 days with them following him. He had many opportunities to do what I told him, and he didn't do it. This was Eitan's explanation for abandoning his agent. Pollard had failed to follow the escape plan. But there's reason to doubt this account. No credible evidence has ever emerged that any escape plan existed beyond vague assurances. More likely, Lekam never had a contingency plan for extracting Pollard. They had squeezed him for everything he was worth. 18 months of suitcases full of America's most precious secrets. And when he was caught, they threw him away. So on the morning of November 21st, when Pollard tailgated a diplomatic limousine through the embassy gates, he was already a dead man walking. He approached the security desk, asked to speak with someone, gave his operational code name. The answer, when it came, was swift and final. The decision to refuse asylum, Eitan confirmed years later, was my call. There's a bitter coda to this betrayal. Before Seller fled to the airport, he found Anne Pollard one last time. Would you like to flee with me? He asked her. She refused to leave her husband. Seller told her not to worry, instructed her to forget his name and his very existence, assured her with words that would prove hollow. We'll take care of everything. They didn't take care of anything. Anne Pollard was arrested the next day. She would spend years in federal prison for helping her husband. Israel squeezed Jonathan Pollard dry like a lemon, and when the lemon was empty, they threw it in the garbage. After their arrests, Jonathan and Anne Pollard were jailed without bail. Anne suffered terribly. She had a debilitating gastrointestinal disorder that had never been properly diagnosed. In the DC jail, her condition deteriorated rapidly. She lost 40 pounds in 3 months. In February 1986, she was finally released on bail for medical reasons. Jonathan, meanwhile, began negotiating with prosecutors. The government was preparing a massive indictment, not just espionage, but drug offenses, tax fraud, and evidence that he had tried to sell secrets to other countries beyond Israel, including Pakistan, South Africa, and Argentina. To avoid a public trial that could expose even more classified information, prosecutors offered a deal. Pollard would plead guilty to 1 count of espionage. In exchange, he would cooperate fully with investigators, submitting to polygraph examinations, detailed interviews, and an extensive damage assessment. Most importantly, the government agreed not to seek a life sentence. Pollard accepted the deal. He pleaded guilty on June 5, 1986. But then came Caspar Weinberger. The Secretary of Defense prepared a 46-page classified memorandum for Judge Aubrey Robinson, Jr., a devastating damage assessment detailing the full scope of Pollard's treachery. Weinberger wrote that he sought to dispel any presumption that disclosures to an ally are insignificant. To the contrary, he declared, substantial and irrevocable damage has been done to this nation. The memo was so classified that even Pollard's own attorneys weren't allowed to read the full version. To this day, portions remain secret. At the sentencing hearing on March 4, 1987, Pollard tried to control the narrative. He painted himself as a devout Jew who had stolen documents dealing only with Arab military capabilities, information vital to Israel's survival that America was wrongfully withholding. None of his actions, he claimed, had harmed American security. Judge Robinson listened. Then he called Pollard to the bench. He showed Pollard the classified Weinberger memorandum, pointed to a specific item on the list of stolen documents. What about this? Pollard fell silent. The item in question, we now know, was the RASIN manual, America's complete guide to signals intelligence collection worldwide, the Bible of the NSA. 10 volumes revealing how the United States monitored communications across the globe. That document had nothing to do with protecting Israel from Arab armies. It was pure intelligence gold, useful to any foreign power that wanted to understand or evade American surveillance. Judge Robinson had heard enough. I sentenced the defendant to imprisonment for his natural life. Jonathan Pollard became the first American ever sentenced to life in prison for passing classified information to an ally. Anne Pollard received 5 years. She was released in 1989 after serving 3.5 years. The couple divorced in 1990. Israel's initial response was a lie. Government officials claimed Pollard had been part of an unauthorized rogue operation, a few overzealous intelligence officers acting without approval from senior leadership. Prime Minister Shimon Peres issued a formal apology and dissolved LACM entirely. It was all a cover story. Rafi Eitan had sought and received permission to recruit Pollard from his superiors. The intelligence he provided went directly to the highest levels of the Israeli government, to Peres himself, to Defense Minister Rabin, to Prime Minister Shamir. Israel didn't officially acknowledge Pollard as their agent until 1998, 13 years after his arrest, and they never fully cooperated with American investigators trying to assess the damage. The Jonathan Pollard case poisoned U.S.-Israeli relations for decades. Secretary of State George Shultz, who had done more than almost anyone in the Reagan administration to strengthen ties with Israel, was livid, not just because of the espionage, but because Israel had lied about it repeatedly, notwithstanding the clarity of the evidence. The American intelligence community never forgave the betrayal. When President Bill Clinton considered releasing Pollard as part of the Wye River peace negotiations in 1998, CIA Director George Tenet personally threatened to resign. The deal collapsed. Vice President Joe Biden, who had been chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time of Pollard's arrest, made his position clear. According to reports, he told a group of rabbis in 2011 that President Obama was considering clemency for Pollard. Biden's response, "Over my dead body." For 30 years, Jonathan Pollard sat in federal prison, first at the maximum security facility in Marion, Illinois, then at the medium security prison in Butner, North Carolina. Israel never stopped trying to get him out. They granted him citizenship in 1996, while he was still behind bars. Successive prime ministers lobbied for his release. Benjamin Netanyahu made it a personal cause, raising the issue with multiple American presidents. In Jerusalem, the city council renamed the square near the prime minister's residence Freedom for Jonathan Pollard Square. Finally, in November 2015, Pollard was granted parole. His life sentence had come with a mandatory parole clause after 30 years. On November 20th, exactly 30 years after his arrest at the embassy gates, he walked out of prison. But he wasn't free, not really. Pollard was required to wear an electronic monitoring bracelet on his ankle. He was forbidden from leaving the New York City area. His computers, and those of any employer, were subject to government monitoring. He couldn't travel outside the United States for 5 years. When his parole restrictions finally expired in November 2020, Pollard immediately flew to Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu greeted him personally on the airport tarmac. Pollard knelt down and kissed the ground. "We are citizens of Israel," he declared. "We are home." He has never expressed regret for what he did. In a 2025 interview, Pollard made his position crystal clear. "Just as certain members of the Trump administration profess an America First doctrine, I wholeheartedly embrace an Israel First doctrine, and I went to jail for that for 30 years. He currently lives in Israel. He has announced plans to run for the Knesset, Israel's parliament. He advocates annexing Gaza and resettling it with Israeli citizens. The man who betrayed America is now trying to shape Israeli politics." The Jonathan Pollard case exposes two uncomfortable truths about American counterintelligence, one damning, one inspiring. First, the system failed catastrophically before the damage was done. The CIA knew Jonathan Pollard was unstable, dishonest, a drug user, and a security risk. They documented it all, and then they failed to share that information with the Navy when Pollard applied for a job handling classified materials. His supervisors caught him lying repeatedly and failed to fire him. They reduced his clearance and then restored it when he complained. They received warnings from psychologists that he was delusional and manipulative and ignored them. His colleagues heard him claim, in a classified workspace, to work for Israeli intelligence. They treated it as a joke, red flag after red flag after red flag, all ignored. If any of those warnings had been heeded, Pollard would never have had access to steal the RASIN manual, would never have delivered 5 suitcases of secrets on his first delivery, would never have compromised the names of thousands of human intelligence sources. The system failed. Second, when the system finally worked, it worked because of one ordinary person doing the right thing. A coworker, anonymous to this day, who noticed something strange on a Friday afternoon. A man carrying documents at an unusual time, getting into his wife's car, heading somewhere that didn't make sense. That coworker could have looked the other way, could have assumed it was nothing, could have decided it wasn't his business, could have gone home for the weekend and forgotten about it. Instead, he reported what he saw. See something, say something. That single report brought down one of the most damaging spies in American history. Jonathan Pollard betrayed his oath, betrayed his country, sold America's most precious secrets for cash and jewelry and trips to Paris and Tel Aviv. He convinced himself he was was a hero, a warrior defending the Jewish state, when in reality he was a troubled fantasist finally living out delusions that had consumed him since childhood. And when he was caught, the nation he truly served, not America but Israel, abandoned him at the embassy gates, left him to face American justice alone. He spent 30 years in prison, the longest sentence ever given to an American for spying on behalf of an ally. Justice was served, not because of sophisticated surveillance or brilliant tradecraft, not because the intelligence community had efficient systems for sharing information, not because anyone in authority connected the obvious dots in Pollard's personnel file. Justice was served because an ordinary American, watching an ordinary Friday afternoon, trusted his instincts and picked up the phone. That's how spies get caught, not always through satellites and wiretaps and surveillance teams. Sometimes it just takes one person who refuses to look the other way, one person who says, "Something is wrong here, and I'm going to report it." The game ended, not with a bullet, but with a knock on an embassy door and the word no. Jonathan Pollard is free now, living in Israel, celebrated as a hero by those who believe his cause justified his crimes. But the damage he caused to American intelligence can never be fully undone. The secrets he stole, the sources he compromised, the trust he shattered between two allied nations. For 30 years he sat in a cell, paying the price for his betrayal. Truth mattered then, it matters now. If you believe the truth still matters, subscribe before this file disappears.